My father always said it the same way. Not casually, not vaguely, carefully. We'll split everything evenly. He said it when we stood in the driveway after Mom's funeral, the house quiet behind us, the future suddenly fragile. He said it again years later, over coffee, when the topic of wills came up and my brother laughed it off like it didn't matter. It's only fair, Dad said then, looking directly at me. I won't let there be resentment. I believed him, not because he was perfect, but because he was deliberate with his words. He didn't promise things lightly. When he said something twice, it usually meant he'd already decided. So when he passed, and the house became the center of everything, I didn't rush. I didn't hover. I trusted the promise. The property was worth around $520,000. The house we grew up in, the one my mother had planted roses behind every spring, the one Dad had insisted would stay in the family. We'll split everything evenly. That sentence echoed in my head as I sat across from my brother in the lawyer's office weeks later. He looked relaxed, almost bored, like this was just paperwork, not history being finalized. The attorney slid the documents across the desk. Deed, title, transfer. My eyes moved quickly at first, scanning, expecting my name to appear alongside his. It didn't. I slowed down. Read again. Still nothing. Only one name. My brother's. I felt heat rise to my face, followed by something colder, steadier. Is this complete? I asked. The lawyer hesitated. Yes, he said. This is the recorded deed. My brother didn't look at me. He leaned back, folded his arms, and said, Dad wanted it this way. The room went quiet. I laughed once, short and voluntary. No, I said. He didn't. My brother finally looked at me then, his expression calm in a way that felt rehearsed. He told me, he replied. You know how Dad was. He changed his mind toward the end. Changed his mind. That phrase landed wrong. Dad hadn't been confused. He'd been stubborn, clear, annoyingly consistent. And he never mentioned this to me? I asked. My brother shrugged. Maybe he didn't want to hurt your feelings. That's when I knew. This wasn't new. This had been decided quietly, without me in the room. I felt the weight of every conversation I'd trusted. Every don't worry about it. Every we'll handle it later. Every time I'd step back because I believed fairness was already built in. The lawyer cleared his throat. There are other assets, he said carefully. But the property was transferred prior to your father's passing. Prior. Not accidental. Intentional. I nodded slowly. Because suddenly, the promise wasn't broken. It had been bypassed. I left the office without arguing. Without crying. Without saying what I wanted to say. Because something had shifted inside me. Not rage. Recognition. My brother hadn't taken a house. He'd been given it, quietly, while I was being reassured. They didn't know what I had already done. Because months earlier, when Dad's health began to decline, I'd started asking questions. Not accusing ones. Practical ones. The kind that don't raise alarms. I kept notes. Copies. Dates. Not because I distrusted him, but because I'd learned something the hard way. Promises don't protect you. Records do. And as I stood in the parking lot staring at my reflection in the car window, one thought settled heavily in my chest. If he was willing to let me believe we were equals, how long had they both been counting on my silence? On the drive home, I kept hearing my father's voice. Not from the lawyer's office. From years earlier. From moments I dismissed as ordinary because I trusted the ending. We'll split everything evenly. He'd said in the kitchen while rinsing his coffee mug, like it was already settled. He'd said it during one of his long talks about doing things right, the ones that usually ended with him reminding us not to fight when he was gone. You and your brother are all each other will have, he'd said once. I won't be the reason you fall out. I believe that more than I should have. Because belief makes you stop paying attention. I started replaying other moments, the ones that felt insignificant at the time. The afternoon my brother moved back into the house, temporarily. The way Dad brushed off my questions about paperwork with, "It's handled." The comment my brother made once, half joking, "Well, someone's got to keep the place." I'd laughed then. I didn't laugh now. When I got home, I opened a folder I'd started months earlier. The one I'd told myself was just for reference. Inside were notes from phone calls, dates of conversations, a copy of an email Dad had sent both of us that said, plainly, We'll divide everything fairly when the time comes. Fairly, not strategically, not quietly, not with side arrangements. I stared at that word for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The date. That email had been sent after the deed transfer my brother now claimed Dad had changed his mind about. My stomach tightened, because that meant one of two things. Either Dad had lied to me, or someone else had. I called the county records office the next morning. I kept my voice neutral, asked for confirmation of the deed transfer. The clerk was efficient, polite. Yes, she said. The property was transferred 18 months ago. Who initiated it? I asked. She paused. Your father signed, but your brother was present. Present. Not a coincidence. I thanked her and hung up. For the first time, the timeline made sense. The temporary move-in, the sudden urgency around paperwork, the way conversations with my father had stayed reassuring, vague, unfinished. Someone had been managing the narrative, and it wasn't the man who kept promising fairness. That afternoon, my brother texted me. You okay? Lawyer stuff can be a lot. I stared at the message. The casual tone, the assumption that this would blow over. Dad said we'd split everything evenly. I typed back. The reply came fast. He changed his mind. Just that. No explanation. No detail. I set the phone down, because the more I thought about it, the less that sentence held up. My father didn't make quiet reversals. He didn't leave loose ends. And he definitely didn't exclude one child without explaining why. Unless he believed I already knew, or unless someone had made sure he didn't have to. That night, I pulled out an old notebook, the kind I used to write down things I didn't want to forget.
There was an entry from a year before Dad died. We asked Dad about keeping the house. Dad laughed it off but didn't answer directly. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now, it felt like a crack I'd ignored. I called the lawyer the next day. I need copies of everything related to the transfer, I said. There was a pause. That may take some time, he replied carefully. Why? I asked. Because, he said, it wasn't part of the estate. It was finalized earlier. Earlier. Again. I hung up and sat very still. Because now I understood something crucial. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about timing. About decisions made while one person trusted words, and another secured paperwork. They hadn't just left me out. They'd kept me calm. And the most unsettling realization of all? The promise hadn't been broken at the end. It had been used to keep me from asking questions at the beginning. As I closed the notebook, one thought settled in with painful clarity. If fairness had really been the goal, why did the truth need to be hidden until it was too late to argue? I didn't confront my brother right away. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I needed to be sure of something first. Whether this had been a misunderstanding or a strategy. I drove past the house that evening. Not to go in. Just to see it. The lights were on in the living room. My brother's truck sat in the driveway, exactly where Dad used to park. The porch light was fixed, the one Dad always meant to repair but never got around to. Someone had finished the things Dad left undone. That detail shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Because it meant my brother wasn't just living there. He was settling in. I went home and pulled out my phone, scrolling through old messages from my father. I hadn't deleted them. I never did. Voice notes, texts, half-finished thoughts he'd send late at night. One message stopped me cold. Don't let paperwork worry you. I'll make sure you're both taken care of. Both. I read it 3 times. Then I checked the date. 6 months after the deed transfer. My hands started shaking. Not with anger, with clarity. I wasn't imagining this. I hadn't misunderstood. I called the county records office again the next morning. This time, I asked a different question. Was there any notation on the transfer? I asked. Any indication it was a gift? The clerk checked. Yes, she said. It was filed as a gift transfer. Gift. I sat back in my chair. So my brother didn't buy it, I said. No, she replied. There was no sale recorded. No sale. No compensation. No balancing asset. Just a gift worth over $500,000. I thanked her and hung up. Because now the lie wasn't subtle. It was structural. I finally called my brother that afternoon. He answered on the third ring. "What's up?" he asked, like this was any other day. "When did Dad give you the house?" I asked. There was a pause. "Why does that matter now?" he replied. "It matters because you told me he changed his mind," I said. "I want to know when." Another pause. Longer this time. "A while back," he said. "How long?" I pressed. He exhaled sharply. "Why are you digging into this?" he snapped. "It's done." That was the answer. Not a date. Not an explanation. Just "it's done." "You were there when he signed," I said quietly. Silence. I waited. "I helped him," my brother said finally. "He wanted it handled." "Handled how?" I asked. "So there wouldn't be confusion later," he replied. I laughed then, a dry, humorless sound. "There wouldn't be confusion for who?" I asked. "For everyone," he said defensively. "No," I said. "For you." He raised his voice. "You always assume the worst." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm looking at the timeline." That's when his tone changed. From defensive to annoyed. "Look," he said. "You're fine. You have your life." I stayed. I took care of things. There it was. The justification. Presence equals entitlement. Proximity equals ownership. And the promise? I asked. The one he made to both of us? He scoffed. "People say a lot of things," he replied. "Paper is what counts." Paper. The word landed hard. Because he was right about one thing. Paper does count. And paper had been handled. Without me. When the call ended, I sat in silence. Because something inside me had finally snapped, not emotionally, but logically. I stopped asking what my father meant. I started asking who benefited. And the answer was obvious. My brother hadn't just received the house. He'd received the advantage of timing, access, and my trust in a promise that kept me patient. What I didn't realize then was how much he was still counting on that patience. How confident he was that I'd accept this the way I always had. Quietly, reluctantly, and alone. He thought this conversation had ended things. In reality, it had clarified them. Because now, the question wasn't why Dad did this. It was who made sure I wouldn't find out until nothing could be undone. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking permission to respond. I stopped calling my brother after that. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood something. Every answer he gave me was designed to end the conversation, not explain it. So I went where conversations didn't matter. I went to records. The county clerk's office smelled like paper and disinfectant, the kind of place where nothing is personal and everything is permanent. I took a number and waited, watching people come and go with folded documents and tired expressions. When my turn came, I slid the form across the counter. "I'd like the full property transfer file," I said. "Not just the deed." The clerk looked up. "Are you a listed party?" "No," I replied. "But I'm immediate family, and I'm requesting it for legal review." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Some documents may take a few minutes," she said. Good. I had time. When she returned, the file was thicker than I expected. Not just the deed, but attachments. Affidavits. A gift declaration. A notarized statement. And something else. A letter. Typed. Signed by my father. Dated. My chest tightened as I read it. "I am transferring ownership of the property to my son for ease of management and continuity of care. This transfer does not reflect final distribution of assets." I read it again. Then again. Ease of management. Not inheritance. Not preference. Not exclusion. I felt dizzy. Because that letter didn't say what my brother claimed it said. It didn't say this is yours alone. It said this is temporary in function, not final in intent. The clerk watched my face carefully. You okay? She asked. Yes, I said. Can I get copies of everything? She nodded. Of course. I walked out of that building with a folder pressed tight against my chest, my heart pounding harder with every step. Because now, the story had changed again. This wasn't just a broken promise. This was a reinterpretation. My brother hadn't lied outright. He'd reframed. He'd taken a functional transfer and treated it like a gift. He'd let everyone assume permanence where none had been stated. And most importantly, he'd let me believe I was already accounted for. That night, I spread the documents across my dining table. The dates lined up too neatly to ignore. The transfer happened while Dad was still alert. The letter was written after repeated conversations about splitting evenly. No amended will. No exclusion clause. Just silence. Weaponized silence. I called the lawyer again. This time, I didn't ask questions. I made statements. There's a letter attached to the transfer, I said. It says the deed wasn't meant to reflect final distribution. The pause on the other end of the line was long. Send me that, he said quietly. I did. His response came the next morning. This changes things, he said. Significantly. How? I asked. Because intent matters, he replied. And your father's intent was documented. Documented. Not remembered. Not argued. Not guessed. Written. I felt something settle in my chest, not satisfaction, but steadiness. For the first time since the lawyer's office, I wasn't reacting. I was moving. That afternoon, my brother texted me. You're still digging? Let it go. I stared at the message. Then replied with one sentence. I found Dad's letter. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then nothing. Hours passed. Then my phone rang. I didn't answer. Because now, I knew something he didn't want me to know. The house wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a correction. What I didn't realize then was how quickly confidence collapses when the version of events you've been repeating stops holding up on paper. Because the next step wouldn't involve persuasion. It would involve accountability. And once accountability enters the room, promises don't matter anymore. Proof does. My brother called 3 times that night. I let it ring. Then he texted. We need to clear this up. Clear it up. Not explain. Not apologize. Clear it up, like something had simply gotten messy on its own. I didn't respond. Because for the first time, the silence wasn't working in his favor. The next morning, the lawyer called me before I'd even finished my coffee. I reviewed the letter, he said. It creates an obligation. An obligation to do what? I asked. To account for the value of the property in the final distribution, he replied. In plain terms, if your brother keeps the house, he may owe you half its value. I closed my eyes. $260,000. The number landed heavy, but not shocking. What if he claims Dad changed his mind after that letter? I asked. He can claim it, the lawyer said. But he'll need proof. And right now, the only proof we have shows the opposite. Proof. That word kept replacing everything else. Emotion. History. Guilt. All of it was being edged out by paper. That afternoon, my brother showed up at my door. No warning. No text. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, posture stiff, not angry, but defensive. You blindsided me, he said the moment I opened the door. I didn't step aside. I asked questions, I replied. You answered them. He scoffed. You went behind my back. No, I said calmly. You went in front of mine. That stopped him. He exhaled slowly. Dad wanted me to have the house, he said. You know that. He wanted you to manage it, I replied. That's not the same thing. He shook his head. You always do this, he said. You complicate things. I felt a strange calm wash over me. I didn't complicate anything, I said. I read the file. His jaw tightened. You don't need the money, he snapped. You're fine. There it was again. Fine. As if stability erased entitlement. As if being okay meant being optional. I don't need to justify needing it, I replied. It was promised. He stepped closer. So what do you want? He demanded. The question wasn't aggressive. It was afraid. I want what Dad said, I replied. Even. He laughed, sharp and bitter. You're really going to do this, he said. You'll drag this through court. I met his eyes. I didn't drag anything, I said. You parked it there when you told me paper was what counts. He went quiet. Because that sentence had come back to him fully formed. We stood there for a long moment. Finally he spoke again, slower this time. What if we settle this between us? He asked. No lawyers. No lawyers. Now that proof existed. I'm open to resolution, I said. With transparency. His shoulders sagged just slightly. You've changed, he muttered. I almost smiled. No, I said. You just can't decide for me anymore. He left shortly after. Not slamming the door. Not storming away. Just retreating. That night, I sent the lawyer one short email. Proceed. The response came quickly. Understood. Because here's the thing they never expect. The person who stays quiet the longest is usually the one who has learned how to move carefully. And carefully doesn't mean weak. It means precise. What I didn't realize then was that the next step wouldn't be dramatic. It would be procedural. Letters. Deadlines. Valuations. The kind of process that strips emotion out of a story and leaves only facts behind. And once that happens, the version of events you've been repeating to yourself for years either survives, or it collapses completely. And judging by the sudden change in my brother's tone, I already knew which way this was going. The appraisal came back faster than I expected. 3 pages. Clean. Clinical. $520,000. No sentiment. No memories. No explanations about who fixed what or who stayed longer. Just value. Seeing the house reduced to a number did something strange to me. It hurt less. Because numbers don't argue. They don't reinterpret conversations. They don't tell you what someone meant after the fact. They just exist. My brother called the same day the appraisal was delivered. His voice sounded different now. Measured. Careful. They're saying the house is worth more than we thought, he said. We. I replied. A pause. You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean, I said. He sighed. This is getting out of hand. Out of hand. As if it had slipped on its own. The letter your lawyer sent, he continued. It says I might owe you money. Half the value, I replied. Yes. That's ridiculous, he snapped. Dad wanted me to have the house. And he wanted us treated evenly, I said. Both things can be true. Silence stretched between us. Then quieter. I can't afford that. There it was. The truth, finally unwrapped. You didn't worry about that when you accepted the transfer, I said. He exhaled sharply. You think this is easy for me, he said. I stayed. I handled everything. And I trusted the promise, I replied. We both made choices. That's when his tone shifted. From defensive to bargaining. What if we adjust? He asked. You get something else. There is nothing else of equal value, I said. He knew that. That's why the house mattered. A few days later, the lawyer explained the options to me. Sell the property and split the proceeds. or my brother keeps it and compensates me. Either way, the promise would be honored. On paper. That word again. Paper. The same word my brother had used to end the conversation weeks earlier. Funny how it came back to demand accountability. The formal notice went out that Friday. Deadlines. Valuation attached. Clear language. No accusations. Just consequences. My brother didn't call after that. My phone stayed quiet in a way that felt intentional. I imagined him walking through the house, our house, noticing things differently now. The walls. The floors. The cost. Not just financial. Emotional. Because once a promise becomes enforceable, it stops being abstract. It starts asking for action. A week later, he texted me. If I sell, you'll really do this? I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then typed back. I didn't do this. I responded to it. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then. I need time. Time. The thing he'd had when he secured the deed. The thing I'd been denied when I trusted words instead of documents. I replied with one sentence. There's a deadline. The lawyer told me later that was the moment everything changed. When people ask for time, he said, it means they're running out of arguments. I slept better that night. Not because I enjoyed this, but because the story was finally moving forward without being rewritten every step of the way. What I didn't realize then was that the hardest part for my brother wasn't the money. It was the shift. From control to negotiation. From certainty to consequence. Because for the first time, he wasn't deciding what was fair. He was responding to what had already been promised. And once a promise becomes a number, you can't talk your way around it anymore. The house went on the market in early spring. No family meeting. No group texts. No last attempts to soften the story. Just a listing. Photos stripped of memory. Rooms staged to look like no one had ever lived there. The roses my mother planted were still in the backyard, but even they looked temporary now. I drove past once. Didn't stop. Because that house no longer held what it used to. 3 weeks later, my brother called. His voice was flat. It's sold, he said. I didn't ask for details. I already knew what came next. The paperwork moved quickly after that. Offers. Escrow. Closing. When the funds were distributed, the number was exactly what the appraisal predicted. $260,000. Half. Transferred into my account without commentary. No note attached. No explanation. Just finality. My brother didn't call after that. Not right away. I imagine he needed time to rearrange the story he'd been telling himself. That he'd earned the house by staying. That Dad had chosen him. That fairness was flexible if no one challenged it. The truth didn't leave much room for that narrative anymore. When we did finally speak, weeks later, it was brief. You didn't have to push this, he said. I didn't push, I replied. I followed. He didn't argue. Because he couldn't. At the next family gathering, things were quieter. Polite. Measured. No one mentioned the house. No one brought up Dad's promise. But something had shifted. People asked instead of assuming. Listened instead of concluding. Paused before deciding what was obvious. And I realized then that this story wasn't really about property. It was about trust. About what happens when you rely on words while someone else secures leverage. About how easily we'll split everything evenly turns into this is already done, when no one expects you to look closely. I thought about the version of myself who'd left that lawyer's office stunned, staring at a deed with only one name on it. How small I'd felt in that moment. How foolish. And how wrong that feeling had been. Because trusting a promise isn't weakness. Refusing to accept its quiet erasure is strength. The money helped. Of course it did. I paid off things I delayed. Set aside security. Let myself breathe in ways I hadn't before. But what stayed with me wasn't the number. It was the moment I stopped asking what my father meant and started honoring what he'd actually documented. That letter, the one buried in the file, mattered more than any conversation ever had, because it proved something essential. He hadn't betrayed me. He'd trusted that fairness would survive him. What he hadn't accounted for was how easily silence could be mistaken for consent. They didn't know what I had already done. They didn't know I'd kept notes, that I'd asked questions quietly, that I'd learned the difference between patience and permission. And by the time they realized it, the story had already changed. Because fairness, when you insist on it long enough, stops being emotional. It becomes structural, unavoidable, permanent. And in the end, that was the real inheritance. Not the money, but the certainty that I no longer had to accept someone else's version of what was fair. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.